And when we take the limits off, then we can figure out who we are and how we move in the world.
Welcome to the dungeon. This is the Days of Change podcast, and today I will be together with Dana Pharant, a leadership coach from Barrie near Toronto, Canada. Now, Dana is not just an average leadership coach like I am. On her LinkedIn profile, she calls herself a badass business performance coach, and she is a former dominatrix. I want to talk about that in this show because her experiences in her previous job is part of her brand, and she has described it in her book with the title, The Inner Dominatrix Guide, Become a Badass in Business. The Days of Change podcast brings you very personal conversations with change makers from around the world. Let's see how personal we will get in this interview and whether this will become my first explicit show. I cannot but refer to her previous occasion, but we have planned to talk about the topic of difficult conversations, which is also at my heart. And I plan to touch on the subject of power, a topic that I had discussed recently with Julie Diamond in another episode of this podcast. If you want to listen to other episodes, please visit our website at changedays.com/podcast. My name is Holger Nauheimer. I met Dana last year at the Toronto Change Days, where she made participants in her workshop eat what, bugs, or was it crickets? We'll find out.
Crickets.
It was crickets, yeah. We had a great session together, not the BDSM type, but just decent and playful improv theater. Dana is a podcaster herself, and I'm a bit embarrassed or maybe just humble because she has produced 123 episodes, while this is just number 60. I will link to her website and to her podcast in the show notes. Dana, it's so great that we found the time to chat together for an hour. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Holger. I was really looking forward to this.
Dana, Yoda says, when you look at the dark side, careful you must be, for the dark side looks back. In your professional life as a dominatrix and as a coach, you must have looked at the dark side of other people, but also at your own. Let's start with yourself. What is the dark side of you that you came to accept and maybe to tame in order to utilize it as a power for your craft?
What a great question. I love this because for me, the dark side and shadow work, is been the most profound way for me to create the changes that I'm looking for in my life and in my business. So looking at what typically people would say, this is bad, this is wrong, this is, immoral. Of course, getting involved with kink, that really opens up all of those pieces that is what most people say is wrong. And in learning to embrace it and say it's not wrong, it's just different. And I love the fact that, within kink, it's about an exploration of the darker side that people call it, but it's an exploration into something that's different without making it wrong, and as long as it is what is in the confines of what we call safe, sane, and consensual. So you're not going to explore anything that's illegal or out of touch with what the other person is agreeing to. But outside of that, then the confines are off, and you can start to take the limits off. And when we take the limits off, then we can figure out who we are and how we move in the world.
In your book, one chapter is titled with Judgment is a Waste of Energy. And obviously this is what you just referred to. I really love that. And you go on explaining how to tell a judgment from awareness. And obviously you've gone quite far with that. I can hear from your answer to my question. Can you please expand a little bit on that?
Thank you. You honor me. It's the immediate response is to want to put a label on something. We want to put things in boxes because we've been taught that we need to get things right. We need to know the right system and the right formula and marry the right person and, buy the right house. And we must get all the things right. And yet, if we start to look beyond that and we say, okay, well, those are judgments. Those are putting labels on things, putting things in boxes. And what if it's not that simple? What if it goes, that we can actually start to go beyond that and say, well, what if there is no such thing as a right choice? And then therefore there's no such thing as a wrong choice. And we take ourselves out of these, rigid boxes. And then we can start to have awareness of like, well, how does that work for me? Is that expanding who I am and where I'm going? Does that take me closer to my goals? Does it move me further away? And so something that could be seen as right or wrong then becomes an awareness of, does it work for me or does it not work for me? Which changes, it frees you up. You have a lot more choice in that moment.
Oh, I love that so much. You might have heard that here in Europe, we had elections on Sunday for the European Parliament. And you might have heard that a lot of parties of what I would call the dark side gained momentum, a lot of right-wing parties. So people who, all political parties carry judgments in front of them, like big posters. Of course, politics is about judgments, and maybe it has to be, certainly. But the experience we have now here in Europe, and of course in your neighboring country. Fortunately, you're from Canada, not from the US.
Yeah.
But I'm sure judgments exist in Canada as well. So we live in a world of judgment, and this is not only through social media. It has been there all the time. Think of witchcraft hunting and all these kind of things in the past. So it sounds good what you're saying, but isn't it? And maybe it can work for yourself, but isn't it naive if we think about the state of the world?
And I think that's where most people use, the justification of, I need to have my judgments because there are bad things in the world. And the only way to fix them is to label them as bad and rally against them. And I don't believe that. I think there's a space and a time for, the rising up and being loud about things. And then there's also the need to shift the gear into, okay, so now that we've drawn awareness by being loud and having our little temper tantrum, now let's come to the table and actually discuss moving forward in a way that works for everyone, not just for me, the one person who's rallying, but how do we move forward as a collective? And my point of view on things is that we are all one. So we would do best, in my opinion, we would do best to start to think in terms of how do we move the collective forward, as opposed to how do I move my agenda forward. And this is where I think, politically across the globe, we're seeing this polarization, but it's, for me, I'm excited because it's an opportunity for change. When we have extreme polarizations, then people can see what's going on and create something new out of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm not as frustrated as I sounded in my question. You're right, the world is polarized, but I also see a lot of forces which go towards the light. So I'm slightly optimistic. Now, obviously, your professions, or at least your profession as a coach and your previous profession, were a good training ground for what you just talked about, for trying to free yourself from judgments. It's a basic craft of the coach is to be free of judgments. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit how you got to that. And for those of our listeners who haven't read your book yet, and I really recommend that, and I'll put it into the show notes, or haven't listened to the one podcast in which you describe your paths, which I like a lot. I think I listened to it twice. So let us do a short review of your story. And I want to create a shortcut because there's so much to talk about. Your early history, as far as I know, in the 90s, you worked as a certified massage therapist and you owned a company selling training supplies. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So that was going on in, for my business. And then in my private life, I started to explore the world of kink. So what happened was that I had a client who came in and she disclosed to me that she was involved in kink, and it was to open up this, ability to have honest conversations, about marks and bruises, and she wasn't going to have to hide it. And that sparked something for me. I really wanted to know more. I'd always had these kind of lingering fantasies and thought that, maybe somewhere I'm kind of broken because I've got these strange fantasies. But in having discussions with her and being able to understand the psyche behind it and how it actually facilitates a deep personal growth, I was hooked. And eventually I got involved in that myself and started to actually be able to untangle some of the abuse that I had suffered as a child, and getting that out of the body in a very deep, profound way that, years of therapy hadn't been able to get in at. And coming out of that and actually realizing that, oh my goodness, I had spent 20 years being depressed, and now all of a sudden that depression is lifted. Like it was really dramatic for me, and it was very powerful. And so experiencing that on the submissive side and having this healing background, I really had a pull to learn to become a dominatrix because I wanted to take other people on this unique healing journey. And I spent the next 6 years studying and learning and taking people through this journey, mostly on a personal level, but I also did some pro work as well. And having that gift, and it changed who I was, who I had to become to be that dominatrix, because it's not like I'm just going to put the uniform on and pretend. You can't pretend in that situation. You have to actually embody it. And in order to embody it, you have to change at a cellular level. It's really quite fascinating.
Wow, there are a lot of points I would like to connect to, but I think before we go deeper in what you just said, we need to explain a couple of things. I'm not quite sure, maybe I'm naive, I'm not quite sure how many of our listeners actually know what we are talking about. I mean, all of them will have a kind of idea, but I guess like myself, I mean, I have my main knowledge from Netflix shows like Bonding and so on. I was never drawn to BDSM, and by the way, BDSM stands as far as bondage, discipline, dominance, and submission. You use the word kink. Is that the same?
Mm-hmm.
People might
it would be more like a slang word. So we talk about kink community and kink being like the overall, because there's not just the BDSM. So BDSM, yes, bondage, domination, submission, masochist, and sadist. There's, so pain, whether you're inflicting pain or receiving pain, there's also, the mind, mental control in the dominance. But basically kink kind of does this bigger umbrella, and it's anything that is outside of what we would call quote unquote normal vanilla sex. So your missionary position, okay, get in, get out, right? It's to be kind of crass. So anything that falls outside of that actually falls in the kink world. And a lot of people don't realize how far this stretches. So if you are, even bringing like fuzzy handcuffs into your bedroom with your partner, that is actually a mild form of kink. And, blindfolds are a mild form of kink. So it's anything that is stretching beyond it. And then there's all these varying shades of how far we go with it. There's, having been in that world, I saw all ends of the spectrum. There's things that we call sensory play, and then there's like really extreme pain, and it encompasses a lot of that umbrella. So that's kind of, where that sits.
Okay. And that's quite interesting, because while you're talking, I became aware that then, yes, there was a certain phase where I experimented with very light forms of kink, but I totally forgot of very, very light bondage forms, right? Mm-hmm. And probably many people have done that, like tying hands or feet to the bed frame, or as you said, blindfolding or something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Even feathers, feathers is like sensory play.
Right.
There's so many things. Like people just tend to think pain, but there's a lot to it. And then the psychology part, you mentioned Bonding. I actually like that show, and I like what they've done because it is the most true to the actual work of anything that I've seen in television so far.
Okay. And it's fun. It's really a fun
It
show.
is fun. It's very
I
funny.
really love it. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't know much about that world, but I keep healthy voyeurism. Let's say I myself. I mean, my most extreme experiments, probably which go away from vanilla sex, is that I had a little bisexual or gay period when I was in my 20s, but that I stopped then quickly. So I'm pretty much back to vanilla. So what I'm curious about, and that's really pure curiosity, dominatrixes obviously are mostly women, and I assume that there are also some men who serve other men. I'm living in near the gay quarter in Berlin, and there are a lot of leather and rubber shops around here. Mm-hmm. But are there also male dominatrices who serve women for money?
Okay, so let's do
Sorry for this.
I know there's a lot of questions in there, and so the term dominatrix is a female term. So typically, the term dominatrix designates to somebody who does this work professionally for money. I chose to use that term because it's recognized, and there's a bit of a head-turning component to it. So on the pro side of it, dominatrix is used. For men, the word is dom, so D-O-M. And then what's interesting is that for women that are non-professional, like they're doing it personally, they would also use the word dom, but it's spelled D-O-M-M-E. So they sound the same, but they look different. And that's another reason why I chose the word dominatrix as opposed to dom, because then which spelling do I go with? It gets confusing. Okay, so then your question about, are there men who, there are far more women who are doing this professionally, because typically the clientele that pay are the high-powered men, and they're looking for that counterbalance. So they're always on, they're always in control, they're always making all the decisions, and typically they're the guys who are running lawyers' offices, they're their partner, they're there may be a CEO. So they feel the pressure, and then going for a session allows them that counterbalance of submitting, being able to have somebody else in charge, being able to let go. And so there are a lot more in that realm. There are women who pay, and there are men who service women. But I would say typically the men who are pros are servicing the gay industry, because again, it's typically the men who will pay. And it's just like the sex industry in general. I mean, this is not sex industry, but on the broader scope, it's more men that will pay for sex than women. And some of it is that, there's just the factor of that it's easier for a woman to get it for free than for a man to get it for free. Sorry, guys.
Well, again, so many threads I want to follow, and let me sort that in my mind. Okay, thanks very much for that. And I would slowly and slightly make the transition to what you're doing as a coach, but there's still a couple of open threads. So before we got into this explanation, you talked about the healing power which you experienced yourself, and obviously you used the profession as a dominatrix also to help other people to heal certain things. So what I'm curious about is, besides the capacity to handle all kinds of tools and the knowledge where and how far to go in the treatment of a client, what did you need to learn for your previous job, which probably then also helped you to get into the profession of a coach?
So many things. I would say one is two main things that stand out for me. One is working with the energy. So being able to drop in and go with the flow of the energy. So when I was working with somebody, I would be really focused solely on them, really seeing what's going on energetically, which is really a great skill to have, because if the person is tied up, blindfolded, gagged, there's not a lot that they can do for communicating. And so having that energetic connection to be able to know, oh, okay, we're starting to approach too much. So backing off slightly, or adjusting, or being able to be in that flow without having to have the person, stop and come out of that space of deep surrender, that's really, really helpful. And of course, that sharpened my already finely tuned skills of intuition and playing with the energy. And then the other piece is being willing to hold that container of, we'll call it power, but it's not a power over, it's a power with. It's holding that strength in that space for the other person to be whatever they need to be, whether they need to yell and scream and, say all kinds of horrible things. It's holding that space without it being about me. I can leave my stuff out of the room and be totally and completely present. That was a huge, huge gift for me with my work now.
It sounds a little bit like my training as a coach, which is on a totally different base. It's based on hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and my great teacher is Stephen Gilligan from San Diego, who is just great in doing the same what you describe, holding the container and sensing the energy of another person. And I think what you just described is really the skill of a great coach.
Yeah. I've often made that correlation for people that, my training to become a dominatrix, I think makes me a very high level coach at this point, because there's not much you can say or do that will shock me, that will, cause me to get out of the state of holding the space, because I've heard a lot. Like I've had a lot of people say some interesting things to me, and to be able to hold space for that is a gift and a talent.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said before, and this is another thread, you talked about the typical clients who visit a dominatrix, and that leads me to the issue of power, because what you describe as a typical client is what I would hold as a cliche or as a judgment. Also, the friends I have who visit dominatrices are rather in a position of power. So that's interesting. So that means we are living in a world where people cannot be authentic, or they believe they cannot be authentic. They have to play a role. And to balance that out, their way of doing it, and I'm not judgmental about that, but is to visit a person like you. Is that the typical situation? And what does that say about power? I know a lot of questions, but I'm
a lot of questions. I love it. I love all your questions. They're fabulous. So I would like to just kind of expand on the fact that I don't think that it's that they can't be authentic, because I think what happens is that having that counterbalance allows them to step into their role of leading and being the leader more effectively, because they have that outlet of surrender. And when you experience and see, again, like as a dominatrix, my having been a submissive first gave me a lot of insight for who I was serving, because I know what it's like to be there. And I think that's more where I would see it as a benefit. These high-powered individuals, typically men, if they go and they experience the deep surrender and loss of control, willingly losing control, then when they come back to holding that power, they can do it from a place of serving as opposed to needing to have power over. So I think it's a balancing as opposed to not being authentic.
Okay. Right.
And then I lost the other questions.
Me too.
Okay, good.
So teach me. I'm working as a team coach. That's one of the things I do. I work with executive teams. I work as a coach, of course, and I would like to have the capacity to help people who I work with to give up control. And sometimes I succeed, but very often I don't. Sometimes I can lead people into where they reflect about themselves and really say, okay, I can give up control here and I can give room for others. but very often they really stick to their role, whether it's in workshops or in a coaching situation. So teach me, what can I do? What are you doing now as you have left the profession of a dominatrix and you work as a coach and probably also with executives? What do you do to encourage those people you just described to experience the moment of giving up control? Or are your clients all coming to you now with the willingness to give up control?
Okay, very loaded question.
Yes.
Some you will never get them to give up control. And often what has to happen is they have to have an outcome that they desire more than the fear they have of losing the control. Because what happens for people is that there is a mechanism that we believe we are getting something out of being in control. And at some point that has served us so well that we've locked it in that this is a vital skill, just like air and water, that we have to have control. And if we don't, we're going to die. And I know that sounds extreme, but that's kind of how it gets locked into the system. So we need to have people who are willing to have something else more than they want that. And for most of the people that I work with, that's where they're at. There's something that has triggered it, and it's like they are willing to do what it takes because everything else that they've done is not working. You know, their personal life is falling apart, or, you know, like if I'm working with a business owner, it's the inconsistencies in income. They're sick of it. They're just tired, and they're like, okay, fine. And I have to get them on board with you know, a contract, so to speak, that they allow me to push them. And so it's just like with my clients in the dungeon, we would have an agreement ahead of time in saying, this is how far I can push you. This is, you know, how, this is the mechanism. And in doing that with somebody and saying, okay, I need your commitment because there's going to be things that are going to be seriously uncomfortable, and we need to break through them in order for you to have the result that you want. If you've got somebody who's an executive who it's the company that wants the result, then they're not going to be motivated or enticed to give up that control factor until they see the cost of it.
Yeah. Reminds me of an interesting story I want to tell you. There is the CEO of a privately owned hotel chain in Germany, and I think he's the son of the founder, so he took over the company maybe 10, 15 years ago or so. And then he did a survey, an employee survey, and the result of the survey was devastating. It basically said, you better leave us because you cannot lead us, and it's just terrible what you do. And he was so devastated, but he learned from that. And what he did is he went to a monastery for a couple of weeks and went into deep contemplation and came out as a different person. Yeah, so there are examples like that, but usually they happen after a crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, most people will not give up their control stuff unless they are absolutely forced to, just because it has served them so well. You know, I see this over and over again. Once we get to looking at the control piece, then every resistance comes up, every excuse comes up. And unless I have them locked into, you have to show up for your appointments because you've already paid for them and there is no refund, I don't usually get past this, because there has to be an outcome. There has to be something that they really want more. It's scary. Yeah.
How often does it happen to you that your coaching clients are not giving in and are not following the lead you are preparing for them?
I would say, really, like now I'm really good about screening people, but I would say probably about 10% of my clients, we get to this point where we start touching on the control factor. And, you know, and sometimes what happens, like actually I have one client that we just finished up her 3-month term and we were just starting to get to the control piece and she wouldn't renew. because it's like it was at the wrong place. If we were at month 2, I might have been able to move her, but because we were at the end of the 3 months, and it was like she's like, no, she was not going to budge on that. So that's where it's like it's an important little dance. I gotta introduce it right at the right time where they're still committed, and we can move it.
So if we think about the way you are having conversations with your clients, I often refer to the simple model that I think Art Kleiner introduced 30 years ago in Peter Senger's Fifth Discipline book, which is called having the balance between advocacy and inquiry. And the school I'm coming from, particularly in Europe, in Germany, the traditional systemic coach is more a person who's inquiring. Some schools of coaching just work with questions. I come to understand for myself, also with the life experience I have and with the companies I've seen and the executives I've seen, that it's also good to have the other side, to advocate for what I think is right or wrong. How do you see that balance? I guess it's the same in Dominatrix's conversation and also how you work with a coach. How much do you listen? How much did you listen as a dominatrix and now as a coach? And how much do you talk and advocate?
Yeah, I think it is a dance. It is a balance. And again, this is where, for me, I really lean into my intuitive skills of checking in of what is it that's going to move the client to the outcome that they've said that they desire. And taking my own agenda out of the equation. And that was always a piece in the dungeon. It was never about my agenda. It wasn't about what serves me, although it looks like that on the outside. It's about what is it going to take to get them to move to where they need to be. So they can see how powerful they are. And it's the same thing with a client. Like, sometimes it's a heavy push, sometimes it is utter silence, and sometimes it's just a gentle nudge with a question of like, wow, that's really interesting. I don't think there's any formula to this other than the formula of being so present and connected with the person that you can actually hear what's going on and be adaptive to what they require.
Yeah, presence is obviously the other big art which a coach needs to master. Do you have any practices for yourself to establish and hold your own presence? What you do before you meet a client or even during a conversation?
Absolutely. So I've of course spent years with this, so I can do it very quickly, but one of my main tools is to take my energy field out and I let it expand out all the way out to like the space of infinite in 360 degrees. And what that does is it allows me to, to stop thinking in this tiny little bubble that, most people tend to sit in. They sit in the size of the room. But when you expand out and you start to allow yourself to just be aware of everything, you can dance and you can move as required. And it also allows me to be free of other people's thoughts and emotions. I can notice them, but they don't get stuck in my system. So that's vital for me. Like, staying expanded out all the time is a lifesaver, and my daily practice, like multiple times a day. The other thing for me is with that, I like to just kind of take my awareness and connect with the core of the planet so that I have a central point that I'm here, I'm grounded, and I'm expanded out so that I'm not out in the ethers. I can still be functioning on this plane. So those are my two key ones.
Do you think the awareness of people, and particularly the awareness of managers and executives you are working with or you observe in the business world, is it really changing? Sometimes it feels like that we enter a new world of leadership. We enter a more reflective relationship to power. And then again, very often I meet executives and managers who still work the same style as managers have worked for a century or so, maybe.
Yeah, I think it kind of speaks to what I see globally, in that there are the people who are stretching for a more expanded consciousness and awareness and way of being and moving in the world. And so then there are those in the business world, the executives and things, who are also bringing that in. And those are the companies that are more resilient to change. They're, dynamically shifting as a time shift, which is so vital right now, because times are changing and technology is changing so rapidly. We do need to be adaptive, even as a big corporation. The corporation needs to be more adaptive. And then the ones who aren't, I would see those ones as the people who are scared to change, and the fear of change stops them from trying anything new. They don't want to try giving up control, because what if that doesn't work? What if that is worse than the disaster that they have? And this is the thing that stops everybody in a personal level as well. It's like, well, I don't know if that's going to work, so I don't want to try it. Prove it first, and then I'll try it. That's like, well, you can't prove it to yourself until you actually try it. So we're in a conundrum. And I think that's really what's going on with those leaders as well.
Yeah, we live in a crazy world. I've been in that profession for such a long time, and I still struggle to understand the fundamentals of the human psyche. Of when I see how often people make their life difficult at work, at home as well, of course, and relationships. I mean, this is another topic. But I mean, how difficult do we make our lives? And I'm the first one to blame. I mean, I've made the lives of many, many people very, very difficult. I hope that I have grown a bit, and I've become a bit more reflective and a bit more appreciative of other people's way of being. But it seems to be ingrained in our systems that we have this, I don't know, do we have a gene for, let's say it extreme, do we have a gene for torturing other people? What is I mean, what is this power? What is it? I mean, you've talked a lot about the positive sides of experiencing domination and submission, and I think I really got your point also from reading your book, and thanks very much on enlightening. And by the way, Judy Diamond, who's the one of the world resources on power, and she's on the show, as I said, says the same. Power is first of all an energy, yeah. But my question I asked her is, why do we see so many dark sides, dark shades of power in the world, in organizations, in families? Let's make it simple. Why do we abuse power?
I think it comes down to not willing to be vulnerable. That we, our power, actually, I think a great deal of our power comes from being vulnerable, being willing to own who we are, how we move in the world, and showing up authentically. And yet that is often the scariest thing for people to do. And so they divert to the cheap method of power, which is the power over. And yet, the power with is a much more lasting, more satisfying method. And it's kind of like, sugar. Sugar is the quick method of energy. And yet if we have, proteins and vegetables, that is a lasting source of energy, not to mention that it's nourishing for the body. So I think that's what's going on, is that people are going for the quick hit. They're looking for the instant. And our society at large has been really glorifying the instant, fast results, how to lose 60 pounds in 30 days, and all these crazy promises, which negates the digging in and doing the deeper process and having that commitment to mastery. We've lost those things. And so when we lose those things, then we also end up diverting over to, how do I get the quick power? How do I get the easy power? And the easy one is the power over. Make somebody feel bad, bully them, tell them what to do. Those are the easy fixes. But the longer, more lasting solution that provides better returns is the willingness to show up and say, okay, I don't really know the answer here, but I would love your help. Why don't we figure it out together? That's a risky situation because we're taught that we need to be in control. Again, it comes back to the control piece, right? So as long as we have these crazy little dynamics going on and we're not willing to risk because we're not rewarded for that kind of risk, I think we're going to have people still searching for that, the quick hit, right? Like the candy bar.
In essence, what you're saying is we need support. We need other people to carry us, to open our space. This is obviously what's on the agenda for the world now, to open space.
It is. And I think there's, like, we're going through the metamorphosis, right? It's uncomfortable to go through this, but there are people who have been there already, who can make the journey a lot faster. And no matter how much you've done in your own personal journey, I mean, I've done some tremendously deep healing work, and I still have people that I'm like, all right, so I got my head up my ass, and can you help me extract it? Right?
Right. It's really good to see so many young people who choose a different path. Look at Greta, the climate activist, and other young leaders who are coming up who are really opening up for a different way of seeing the world. So again, I'm optimistic.
I think there's a lot of potential. I really do. Yeah. And we often need to make a mess of things in order to see what needs to be cleaned up.
Dana, would you have something like a little exercise, a little tool, a little reflective thing for our listeners, which they can readily apply to themselves, maybe to look at their own way of dealing with power, of their own way of being dominating or submissive or so? Any little brain exercise?
I would say kind of a morning journal exercise. Most of us do this, some sort of journaling, but, in the morning, just right at the top of the page, what's the upside of letting go of power and control? And let yourself journal on that for a couple of weeks to really start to see what the benefits are. And it starts to, kind of seep into yourselves, because what's happening is that we're seeing where the fear is. But if we start to allow ourselves to kind of like really explore, but on a deeper level, like just let that bubble up, not your brain, but let it bubble up from your intuition and see what comes from that exploration. And along with that, try the expanding out so that you move your energy field out and breathe into it.
And I want to recommend to our listeners another exercise which you taught me yesterday. Actually, it was 11 p.m. here in Germany, and I was sitting at my computer, and suddenly I got a message popping up which said, Dana Pharant is live now on Facebook. And I clicked in, and wow, I was so touched, because what you did there, if I may tell, what you did is you talked about 4 persons you love and why you love them and you appreciated them, and that was so touching. And I think you were touched yourself, and I think I will do that sooner or later. And it must have been an incredibly cleaning exercise for you to do that.
It is. It's a great way to reinforce that, that there's more than just you, and if you give unconditionally, to notice what comes back. And that was the exercise for me. To do it publicly was a way for me to deepen this space of this is who I'm grateful for, because it's really easy for me to get caught up in the, oh, this isn't working, that isn't working, and I need to do this harder, because I'm always striving for more. And in stopping and really taking a moment to say, wow, look at these people. They're amazing. Showering on them the thing that I want to receive. And of course, I come from the perspective that we're all one. So in showering on them, I am showering it on me.
Dana, there's one thing I would like to talk with you about. As I said at the beginning, we met at the Toronto Change Days, and you know the whole story. Change Days started 11 years ago in Berlin with the Berlin Change Days, and last year was the first time we brought it to Toronto. Actually, our friends Rich Batchelor and Nick Beeson brought it to Toronto, and there will be another one in November this year on values. And I would like to describe to our listeners the experience you had at the Toronto Change Days.
I loved that conference. I mean, yes, I was facilitating on it, but as a participant, it's such a unique experience because you actually feel like you as a participant are engaged in it and forming it and molding it along with everyone. So it really had this beautiful collective energy and a way of engaging conversation and opening up discussion that I haven't really experienced at very many places unless it's a very small, intimate experience. So it was really, really well done. I got so many learnings out of it. There were amazing facilitators that came out, and it stretches your mind into new possibilities. It's like, oh, there's a new way of looking at that. Oh, there's a new way of facilitating this, or wow, that's a great way to create an engaging experience. So there's multiple layers that were happening. Plus, the people that are drawn to it were really such beautiful souls. I loved everyone that I got a chance to interact with.
Yeah, me too. And I love you, Dana. Thanks so much for being my guest today. I love the conversation. I'm not sure whether it's explicit or not. I have to listen to it. And I hope our clients listen to it as well and enjoy it as I did. Dana, you're a wonderful soul. It's so great that we met. And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Holger. You are an amazing individual, and I have thoroughly enjoyed all the time we've had together.